of course, there's a direct primary incremental impact on revenue for more content. You drive more traffic, conversion rate indicates that you'll ultimately drive more revenue.
Welcome to CounterPunch. My name is Phillip Thune from TextBroker, the leading place to get written content, and I'm also the commissioner of the Digital Marketing League. We are very pleased today to have Mike King, CEO and founder from iPullRank. Mike, glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Phillip. Excited to be here.
All right, so let's explain how this works really quick. You should see the clock behind me, 1 minute. I'm going to ask Mike a question. He's going to have 1 minute to answer. I'm going to then answer that same question in a minute. Cassandra is our judge today. She'll tell us who did better for that question. We'll do that 2 more times, and we'll see who wins this episode of CounterPunch. All right, Mike, so we're going to jump right into it. My first question for you is, what is the biggest misconception that people have about creating a content strategy?
The biggest misconception that they have is that they don't need one. And so what I mean by that is, like, so many organizations are like, oh yeah, we're doing content. But the problem is no one owns content. So everyone thinks they own content. And so they're all just like running around doing these things as like isolated incidents, when what you really need is some sort of centralized content strategy in alignment with the business objectives. And so because people don't think that they need a content strategy, you just have content that's all over the place. It doesn't really adhere to the same things. And so everyone is just like trying to make their infographics or their blog posts or their video, and nothing is really compounding in the way that it should, so you can get all the value that you hear about content marketing driving. So that biggest misconception right there is that you don't think you need a content strategy, and every single person does.
Cool. And you've actually got a little bit of time left. And before I sort of take my crack at that answer, I just follow-up question. So when you work with a new client, how easy is it to sort of explain this to them? Because you just explained it really well. When you explain it to them, does it in a minute? Do they get it and they kind of understand what they need to do?
I think the people that hire us because they've been educated by our own content is they kind of come into it knowing that.
Okay.
And so what we do is we work with them to build out like workflows and governance models to basically spread across the organization so everybody can be working from the same playbook, so to speak.
Got it. Makes sense. All right. So Cassandra's going to put a minute back on the clock for me. Biggest misconception from what we see, and we're working with thousands of folks who come to us because they know they need content. So they've probably already crossed that hurdle. But I'd say the biggest misconception is quantity versus quality. And that's changed over time, right? Years and years ago, before Google's algorithms, Panda updates, Panda and Penguin, quantity actually was a smart strategy. But at this point, sometimes clients come to us and they're like, I got to go big, right? I'm going to go for, hundreds and hundreds of pieces. And we'll try to bring them back and say, okay, well, that's great. And maybe over time we'll get there. But I don't know. In my view, I think the most important thing right now, given all of Google's algorithm updates, is quality. So make sure you're doing quality. That's not focus number one, that's like Ford's job number one, right? So on content creation, quality is number one, and then we'll get to the quantity, assuming that we've kind of got it going right. All right, and Mike, you may not know this, but I always have trouble meeting the time, so I'm impressed. I'm impressed that we both got there. The crowd is happy about that. So I'm going to get the word from Cassandra about who won that round. Mike, you had the better answer. I agree with that. Yes, congratulations. So Mike is up 1-0, and this time Mike is going to ask me a question. I'll go first. Go ahead, Mike.
All right, Phillip. So how exactly does a good content strategy increase incremental revenue?
All right, good question. I've got that 1 minute on the clock. I'm gonna focus on some e-commerce clients that we've had, and so I'll focus there. Mike, I'm sure you'll take a different tact on this, but one thing to think about if you are an e-commerce company, if so many I'm gonna say this because I still see so many people doing it wrong, but you probably have a category page, right? You sell clothes, so you've got men's, you've got women's, you've got pants, you've got tops, you've got footwear. A lot of times on that page, it's just pictures, right? So just pictures, and then they're hoping that you'll kind of get deeper into the category and see all the specific products. And at this point, most e-commerce companies, I think, do a really good job with their product descriptions. They understand how important written content is to their product descriptions in addition to the photos or maybe videos. But on the category page, it's crucially important because Google, you want that page to rank well because not everybody knows exactly which product they're going to buy. And so we had a case with a huge e-commerce company. See, there Mike could go. I'm going to go over. But we had a case with a huge e-commerce company. All they did was add sort of a couple blocks of text to the bottom of the category page. And to be in all honesty, it wasn't meant necessarily for people reading the page. It was more meant for Google, but it had a pretty impressive incremental impact. I think they did a study. They told us that by adding that content on the bottom of the page, they saw a 5% increase in traffic, and they were able to kind of A/B test that. And for 5% may not sound like a lot, but when you're huge, when you're doing billions of dollars, 5% makes a difference. So that's my example. Mike, I'm going to turn it back around and give you 1 minute to answer that same question. Cassandra's putting the time on the clock. There we go. All right, Mike, you answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with that. I've seen exactly what you're describing happen numerous times for clients. But I think of this one from like more of a big picture perspective because it depends on one, the business goals, and then two, the business model, right? So when we're talking about e-commerce, of course, there's a direct primary incremental impact on revenue for more content. You drive more traffic, conversion rate indicates that you'll ultimately drive more revenue. But there's also the secondary conversions that can be driven by this as well. So you got to think about it from the perspective of like, okay, did someone coming into the site via organic search or through organic social or via email on this piece of content, did they ultimately convert later down the line? Because that touch does matter. So you really got to think about the assisted conversions to this as well. It can't just be like, oh, did someone reading this immediately go and buy something? Because that's far less likely to happen, period.
Got it. Okay, no, that makes sense. And again, right on time. Cassandra's letting me know. Well, actually, I'm surprised. Somehow I won that round. Like, so we are tied 1-1. We're going to go to the final question. This one, yeah, here we go. The crowd's getting excited. This one is to see who wins this episode of CounterPunch. And Mike, I'm going to ask you, if you've got a really big content project, fairly complicated, lots of different aspects to it, how do you break it down for a client? How do you kind of set milestones, make sure you're on track?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So the first thing is you got to be in alignment with the business objectives. Like, what are they trying to accomplish, right? And so you got to figure out which components of your content plan align directly with that. Clock isn't running, but I'll take the extra time. So the content plan has to be aligned with those business objectives, and you've got to have a couple of those quick wins so that you don't lose that momentum with the project. Because if you go with the biggest thing first, and then everybody has to wait 2 months for it to be turned around and put out, that's going to peter out very quickly. So what you want to do is figure out the right way to align your content plan against the data as far as what are the outcomes that we're projecting, and then come up with the right assets for that time period. So rather than being like, oh, let's do this whole big interactive piece first, why don't we start with a few blog posts and a few infographics and a few, smaller things that you can execute on so you can see the needle move, people stay involved, and then you just continue to that content calendar. But you also have to continue to be flexible because if we find something that we thought was going to work, doesn't work, again, you don't want to lose that momentum. So it very much needs to be aligned to how do you move the needle and then keep things going. Got it.
That makes a lot of right on time. And that makes a lot of sense. Cassandra, I'll let you put a minute back on the clock up there. My answer is actually, this is one where I think our answers are going to be almost identical. I would say, we say this over it's interesting. I would say again, start small, right? That's your point. And sometimes we don't follow our own advice. So we do something called managed service or managed projects. So somebody comes to us and we take care of everything from placing their orders on TextBroker to editing the content to making sure it follows the style guide. And we just know that, we need to start with like 2 or 3 pieces of content for that much bigger strategy. and make sure the client's happy with them, make sure we've got the tone and the style and the voice right, to the extent that we can run some tests and see how that initial content is sort of performing or reacting, or even how's the organization kind of liking it or not liking it, and then adapt before we go big. But yeah, every once in a while we get a new client and they're like, I got to have this content right away. I can't wait for, a kind of a 1 or 2 week pilot period with 2 or 3 articles. Let's go big. Let's do 100 at a time. And then we find that we're revising 100 articles instead of revising 2 articles. So I think the point you made, and I bet Cassandra's going to think you made it better than me, but I totally agree with it. Kind of start small, make sure you're testing, and then once you're comfortable, once you think it's working, go big. All right, so I'm going to wait for the official. Yeah, here we go. That's the bell. I'll wait for the official answer from Cassandra. Yeah, no surprise, Mike, you won that one. That means you win this episode of CounterPunch. The crowd agrees. And so that's it for this time. We are gonna have another episode with Mike, so I totally recommend that you look that up. Mike, I might be putting you on the spot, but hopefully you'll be a guest with us on a future Digital Marketing League conference. Do more of an hour-long presentation so our audience can hear that much more from you.
Let's do it.
Sounds good. So stay tuned. If you like this episode, please click that like button. If you have any comments, please leave them below. And in order to stay tuned, so you can hear more from us and eventually hear more from Mike, click that subscribe button. Thanks, Mike. That was great. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Stay tuned. That's hot.